A billionaire who had everything discovered that the one person who could save his life was the one person he had thrown away. And what happened next destroyed everything he believed. James Whitfield came back after 34 years. He expected nothing from the father who abandoned him. But what he found in that hospital room changed everything. And the choice he made will stay with you long after this story ends. Hello and welcome. If this is your first time here, please subscribe. If you've been with us before, thank you for coming back. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Miami, Cape Town, maybe Port of Spain or Birmingham? We want to hear from you. Now, pay attention to what happens next, because this is the kind of story that teaches you something about the human heart, something you won't forget. It begins in a hospital in Boston. Not a private hospital. Not one of those places with marble floors and fresh flowers on every table. Massachusetts General Hospital. A public hospital where the waiting room chairs are hard and the coffee is bad, and the fluorescent lights hum so loud you can hear them when everything else goes quiet. It was a Tuesday in February. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin. It gets into your bones. It gets into the walls. The windows of the hospital were fogged with condensation, and outside, the snow was coming down in thick sheets that turned the city into something soft and blurred, like a painting left out in the rain. On the fourth floor, in the cardiac intensive care unit, a man named Richard Whitfield was dying. And that is the thing about death. It does not care how much money you have. It does not check your bank balance. It does not ask for your name or your title or the number of buildings you own. It comes for everyone the same way. Quiet, patient, certain. Richard Whitfield was 76 years old. He lay in a hospital bed with tubes in his arms and wires on his chest and a machine beside him that beeped in a steady rhythm like a clock counting down something nobody wanted to count. His skin was gray. Not pale, gray. The color of old concrete. His hair, what was left of it, was white and thin and pressed flat against the pillow. His hands lay on top of the blanket, and they were the hands of a man who had never done physical labor in his life. Soft, manicured. A gold watch on his left wrist that cost more than most people's houses. Even now, even dying, Richard Whitfield wore that watch. Because Richard Whitfield needed the world to know what he was worth, even when what he was worth was running out. Richard had built Whitfield Capital Partners from nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. He had started with a small inheritance from his father, about $200,000, in 1972. But he had turned that $200,000 into something enormous, a private equity firm that managed $11 billion. $11 billion. That is a number most people cannot even picture. He owned homes in Boston, New York, and Palm Beach. He had a yacht. He had a private jet. He sat on the boards of 4 corporations and 2 hospitals, including this one. The irony of that was not lost on the nurses. But for all his money, for all his power, for all the deals he had closed and the companies he had bought and the men he had shaken hands with in boardrooms that overlooked city skylines, Richard Whitfield was alone in that hospital room. No wife sat beside his bed. His first wife, Helen, had divorced him in 1989. His second wife, Patricia, had divorced him in 2002. His third wife, Vanessa, had left him 4 years ago and moved to London, and the last thing she said to him was, "You love your money more than you have ever loved a human being." He had 2 children from his second marriage, a daughter named Claire and a son named Thomas. Claire lived in San Francisco and had not spoken to Richard in 3 years. Thomas lived in New York and only called when he needed money, which was often, and those calls lasted less than 4 minutes every time. There was one other child, but Richard never spoke about him. He had spent 34 years making sure nobody knew that child existed. And that is the thing about secrets. They don't disappear just because you stop talking about them. They just go underground. They grow roots, and eventually, they push back up through the surface whether you want them to or not. But what Richard didn't know yet was that his secret was about to walk through his hospital door. Now let me tell you about James Whitfield. Or rather, James Carter. Because that was the name he grew up with. The name his mother gave him. The name on his medical school diploma. The name the nurses called when they paged him. Dr. James Carter. James was 34 years old. He was not a tall man, 5'9", lean. He had dark brown skin and close-cropped hair, and hands that were steady in a way that most people's hands are not. Surgeon's hands. He kept his nails short and clean. He wore a simple silver watch, not expensive, that his mother had given him when he graduated from medical school. He had a habit of tapping his index finger against his thigh when he was thinking, a small, rapid tapping, like he was sending a message in code to himself. James was a cardiothoracic surgeon, one of the best in the state. At 34, he had already performed over 300 heart surgeries. His colleagues called him calm. His patients called him kind. His residents called him demanding but fair. His chief of surgery called him the future of the department. James did not think about any of these things. He thought about the next patient, the next surgery, the next life he could save. That was how his mother had raised him. One thing at a time, one foot in front of the other, one person at a time. His mother's name was Gloria Carter. She was 56 years old. She lived in a small house in Dorchester, a neighborhood in Boston where the houses sat close together, and the porches creaked, and the sounds of the city came through the windows at night like a lullaby made of traffic and distant music. Gloria worked as a nurse's aide at a rehab center. She had worked there for 22 years. Before that, she had cleaned offices at night while James slept at a neighbor's apartment. Before that, she had waitressed at a diner on Blue Hill Avenue, where the tips were small and the hours were long, and the grease from the kitchen got into her hair so deep that she had to wash it twice every night. Gloria had raised James alone. Completely alone. No family, no partner, no safety net. She had gotten pregnant at 21. The father was a man she had met at a fundraiser where she was working as a caterer. He was handsome. He was charming. He wore a suit that fit like it was made just for him, and she later learned that it was. He told her his name was Richard. He did not tell her his last name until the second time they met. He did not tell her he was married until Gloria was already 3 months pregnant. When Gloria told Richard she was pregnant, he did not yell. He did not panic. He did something worse. He was calm, cold. He sat across from her at a restaurant table and spoke in the same voice he used in boardrooms. He told her the child was a complication. He told her he would arrange for her to go to a clinic. He told her he would pay for it. All of it. And then, as if he was closing a business deal, he slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a document, a non-disclosure agreement. Sign this, take the money, make the problem go away. Never contact me again. Gloria looked at the check. She looked at the document. She looked at this man in his perfect suit with his perfect hair and his perfect calm, and she understood something in that moment that would define the rest of her life. She understood that some people see human beings as line items, as problems to be solved, as complications to be managed. She pushed the envelope back across the table. She stood up, and she said, "This baby is not a complication. This baby is my child, and I will raise him without you. But you should know that one day, this child is going to be somebody, and you are going to wish you had been part of that." Then she walked out of that restaurant, and she never saw Richard Whitfield again. And that single moment set off a chain of events nobody could stop. Gloria raised James in that small house in Dorchester. The house had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen with yellow curtains that Gloria sewed herself from fabric she bought at a discount store on Washington Street. The fabric had small sunflowers on it, and Gloria spent 3 evenings hemming the edges by hand because she didn't own a sewing machine. When she hung them up, the morning light came through and painted golden patterns on the linoleum floor. Those patterns moved as the sun crossed the sky. By afternoon, they were on the wall. By evening, they were gone. But every morning, they came back. James grew up watching those patterns. He didn't know it then, but that rhythm, that daily return of something beautiful, was shaping something inside him. A belief that good things come back. even when they disappear for a while. The house smelled like cocoa butter and whatever Gloria was cooking for dinner. Usually rice and beans with a little bit of hot sauce. Sometimes chicken legs that she bought on sale at the market on the corner. The one run by a Dominican family who always gave James a free piece of candy when he came in with his mother. On good weeks, when the tips were better than usual, or when the elderly couple paid extra for the Saturday laundry, Gloria made oxtail stew. She would start it early in the morning, browning the meat in a heavy pot that had belonged to her own mother. The stew would simmer all day on low heat, filling the house with a smell so rich and warm that it seeped into the curtains and the couch cushions and even James's school clothes. He would walk into class smelling like oxtail and garlic, and his teacher, Mrs. Hawkins, once said, "James, whatever your mama is cooking, I want the recipe." James was a quiet boy, not shy, quiet in the way that certain children are quiet because they are busy watching everything. He watched how Gloria counted change at the kitchen table on Sunday nights, separating quarters from dimes from nickels, making small, careful stacks. He watched how she ironed her uniform for the diner, pressing the creases sharp, even though she was going to a place where she would spend 8 hours carrying plates and wiping tables and smiling at people who didn't always smile back. He watched how she read the newspaper every morning, folding it in half and then in quarters, her lips moving slightly as she went through the headlines. He watched everything. And what he learned from watching was this: his mother never cut corners. She never half did anything. Even the smallest task, even ironing a uniform she would stain by noon, she did it all the way. James liked reading. He liked science. He liked taking things apart to see how they worked. When he was 6, he took apart the kitchen radio. Gloria found him on the floor surrounded by screws and wires and a look of total concentration on his face. She didn't yell. She sat down next to him and said, "Can you put it back together?" He could. He did. It even worked afterward, though the volume knob was a little loose. Gloria looked at the reassembled radio and looked at her son and said nothing, but her eyes said everything. When he was 8 years old, Gloria took him to a garage sale 3 blocks over. A retired science teacher was selling boxes of old classroom supplies. Gloria spotted something on a folding table between a broken lamp and a stack of encyclopedias, a plastic model of the human heart. It was dusty. The box was dented. The price tag said $2. Gloria picked it up and put it in James's hands. James opened the box on the walk home. You could pull the model apart and see the chambers and the valves and the arteries, each one painted a different color. Red for the arteries, blue for the veins. The aorta was a thick tube at the top that curved like a shepherd's crook. James spent hours with that model at the kitchen table. He would take it apart and put it back together over and over, his small fingers fitting the pieces into place with a patience and focus that Gloria had never seen in a child before. He would line up all the pieces on the table and then reassemble them from memory, and he got faster each time. He named the parts: left ventricle, right atrium, mitral valve. He said the words out loud like they were magic spells. Gloria watched him from the kitchen doorway one evening, drying a dish with a towel, and she thought, "This boy is going to be a doctor." She didn't say it out loud. She didn't want to put pressure on him. She just thought it. And then she picked up an extra shift at the diner and started putting $20 a week into a savings account she opened at the bank on the corner. Gloria worked 3 jobs at one point. The diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then she would come home, feed James, help him with his homework, read to him from whatever library book they had checked out that week, and then leave at 8 o'clock for the cleaning service. She cleaned offices in downtown Boston from 9 at night until 2 in the morning. The buildings were empty at that hour. The hallways echoed. The trash cans were full of coffee cups and crumpled paper, and the remains of lunches eaten at desks by people too busy to go outside. Gloria emptied those trash cans and mopped those floors and wiped those desks, and then took the bus home and slept for 3 hours before the alarm went off for the diner. On weekends, she did laundry for Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, the elderly Nigerian couple on the next block. They paid her $30 each Saturday. They also gave her a plate of jollof rice and fried plantain that she brought home to James. Mr. Okafor called James the professor because the boy always had a book in his hand. Mrs. Okafor called him my doctor because of the plastic heart on his desk. They were both right. Gloria was tired all the time. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and makes your body feel heavier than it actually is. The kind of tired that turns your eyes glassy and puts a permanent ache in your lower back. But she never let James see it. She never complained. She never said the words, "We can't afford it," even when they couldn't afford it. She just found a way. She always found a way. When James needed new shoes for school, she picked up an extra cleaning shift. When he needed a graphing calculator for algebra, she sold a necklace she had gotten as a birthday present from a friend. When his winter coat got too small, she found one at a church donation center and sewed a new zipper into it herself, by hand, at the kitchen table, while James slept. She never told him they didn't have enough. She just made sure there was food on the table and sunflower curtains on the window, and a mother who showed up to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every science fair. Even if she had to come straight from scrubbing an office floor with bleach still on her hands and sleep still in her eyes. She showed up. Every single time. James knew they were poor. He wasn't stupid. He saw the stacks of quarters on the kitchen table. He saw the way his mother counted them twice. He knew the other kids at school had newer shoes and bigger lunches and houses that didn't have drafts coming through the windows in winter. But he also knew something those kids didn't know. He knew what it looked like when somebody loved you with everything they had. When somebody gave you their whole self without holding anything back. And that knowledge, that certainty, was worth more than anything money could buy. It was the foundation Lorraine told Derek about, the one you build everything else on. When James was 12, he asked Gloria about his father for the first time. They were sitting at the kitchen table. The sunflower curtains were glowing in the late afternoon light. Gloria put down her fork. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father is a man who had a lot of money and very little heart. He made a choice when you were born. He chose to walk away. That choice says everything about him and nothing about you. You are not what he left behind, James. You are what I built." James never asked about his father again. Not because he didn't care, but because his mother had given him everything he needed in those 4 sentences. He was not what was left behind. He was what was built. But what James didn't know yet was that his father was about to need him more than he had ever needed anyone. James went to public school. He got a full scholarship to Boston University. He graduated top of his class. He went to medical school at Tufts. He did his residency in cardiothoracic surgery at Massachusetts General. He was the youngest surgeon to complete the program in a decade. He never told anyone about his father. Not his professors, not his friends, not the woman he was dating, a pediatric nurse named Sonia who had kind eyes and a laugh that made James feel like the room was 10 degrees warmer. He kept that part of his life in a box, a closed box, a box he didn't plan on opening. Then one Tuesday in February, James was paged to the cardiac ICU. A 76-year-old male, severe aortic stenosis. The aortic valve was calcified and failing. The patient needed emergency surgery, an aortic valve replacement. Without it, the man would die within 48 hours. The case was urgent. The patient was high profile. The chief of surgery specifically requested James. James walked into the room. He looked at the chart on the door. He read the name. Richard Whitfield. His hand stopped on the chart. His index finger tapped against his thigh once, twice, 3 times, fast. Then it stopped. He stood in the doorway and looked at the man in the bed. The gray skin, the white hair, the gold watch on the wrist, the monitors beeping their steady countdown. James stood in the doorway and looked at the man in the bed. The gray skin, the white hair, the gold watch on the wrist, the monitors beeping their steady countdown. The room smelled like antiseptic and clean sheets, and something else underneath, something metallic, the smell that hospital rooms get when a body is fighting hard to stay alive. James had never seen his father's face before, not in person. He had looked him up online once, when he was 19. He was in his dorm room at Boston University, late at night, after a conversation with a classmate about fathers. The classmate was talking about his dad coaching his little league team, and something twisted in James's chest, and he went back to his room and opened his laptop and typed the name Richard Whitfield into the search bar. He found a photo on a business magazine website. A man in a dark suit standing in front of a glass building, arms crossed, chin up, the kind of pose that says, "I own this, and everything you can see from here." James stared at that photo for a long time. He studied the jawline, the eyes, the way the man held his shoulders. He looked for himself in that face. He found his own eyes staring back at him. Then he closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a while, and he went back to studying organic chemistry because that was something he could control. But now here he was. Richard Whitfield, in the flesh. Not in a photo on a screen, not a name on a check. A real person. 76 years old, gray and thin and dying in a hospital bed with a failing heart. And his son, the complication, the problem, the line item on a balance sheet, the $50,000 mistake, was the only surgeon on call who could save his life. Now here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. James stepped out of the room. He walked to the nurse's station. His shoes made no sound on the linoleum. He set down the chart on the counter carefully, the way you set down something that might break. He looked at the head nurse, a woman named Dolores Baptiste who had worked the cardiac ICU for 16 years and had worked with James for 4 of those years. Dolores was 52, Jamaican-born. She had arms like a wrestler and a voice like warm syrup, and she could read a person's face the way most people read a clock. One glance and she knew the time. "I know who he is," James said quietly. He said it without looking at her. He said it to the counter, to the chart, to the fluorescent light buzzing above them. Dolores stopped what she was doing. She set down the medication log she was holding. She looked at James. Then she looked at the chart. Then she looked at James again. "The patient in 412, she said slowly. "He's my father," James said. The word felt strange in his mouth. Foreign. Like saying a word in a language you studied but never spoke. Dolores was quiet for a moment. She had known James for 4 years. She had seen him lose patience and keep his composure. She had seen him work 18-hour shifts without raising his voice. She had seen him sit with a dying woman's family for an hour after his shift ended because they needed someone to explain what was happening in words they could understand. She knew James Carter was the steadiest man she had ever met. And right now, standing at the nurse's station, she could see that steadiness being tested in a way it had never been tested before. His finger was tapping against his thigh, fast, like a drum roll. "Can you transfer the case?" she asked. "To who?" James said. He looked at her now. His eyes were clear, but something was churning behind them. "Dr. Patel is in surgery until 6. She's doing a triple bypass. Dr. Morrison is at a conference in New York. He won't be back until Thursday. This man doesn't have until tomorrow, Dolores. His aortic valve is 90% calcified. If we wait, he codes. And if he codes with a valve that compromised, we lose him." "Then what are you going to do?" James tapped his finger against his thigh. He looked at the floor, the linoleum tiles, the scuff marks from 1,000 pairs of shoes. He looked at the ceiling, the fluorescent tubes behind their plastic covers, one of them flickering slightly in the corner. He looked at the door to room 412, where a man who had tried to buy his mother's silence for $50,000 and a signature was lying with a heart that was giving out. And that is the thing about character. It does not show up when things are easy. It shows up when things are impossible. When every part of you wants to walk away. When every memory you have of a mother counting quarters and ironing uniforms and sewing zippers by hand is screaming at you that this man does not deserve your gift. And you stay anyway. Not for him. For you. For who you are when no one else is making the choice. "I'm going to do my job," James said. He said it simply. The way you say something that has already been decided. He went back into the room. Richard was awake. His eyes were open but cloudy, unfocused. The way eyes get when the body is using all its energy just to keep going. Richard looked at James. He saw a young man in a white coat with a stethoscope in steady hands and a silver watch. "Are you my surgeon?" Richard asked. His voice was weak, a whisper with edges. "Yes, sir," James said. "I'm Dr. Carter. I'm going to explain what's happening and what we need to do." Richard didn't recognize the name. Carter was Gloria's name. It meant nothing to him. He nodded weakly and listened while James explained the procedure. Aortic valve replacement. Open heart surgery. 3 to 5 hours. Significant risk. But without it, certain death. "Do it," Richard said. He didn't ask about the risks. He didn't ask about recovery time. He said 2 words. "Do it." The way he said everything. Like a command. Like a man used to giving orders even when his body was failing. "Stay with us, because what happens next will shock you." The surgery lasted 4 hours and 27 minutes. James stood at the operating table under lights so bright they erased every shadow in the room. The anesthesiologist sat at Richard's head, monitoring the screens. 2 nurses stood at James's side, handing him instruments before he asked for them because they had worked with him long enough to know his rhythm. The bypass machine hummed in the corner, doing the work that Richard's heart could not do right now. Keeping the blood moving, keeping the body alive while James worked. James made the incision, sternum saw, retractor, the chest opened. And there it was, Richard Whitfield's heart, exposed, vulnerable, beating faintly through the assist of the machine. The aortic valve was visible, and even under the surgical lights, James could see the damage. The valve was thick with calcium deposits, stiff, barely opening. A valve that should move like a door was moving like a door with cement poured into the hinges. No wonder the man was dying. His heart had been trying to push blood through an opening the size of a pencil eraser. It had been working 10 times harder than it should have been, for years, slowly exhausting itself. And Richard, being Richard, had probably ignored the symptoms. The shortness of breath he blamed on age. The chest tightness he blamed on stress. The swelling in his ankles he didn't mention to anyone, because admitting a problem was the same as admitting weakness, and Richard Whitfield did not admit weakness. James worked. He removed the calcified valve piece by piece. Careful, methodical, each movement precise. He had done this surgery many times, but this time was different, and he knew it. His hands knew it. Not because they shook, they didn't, but because they were aware of themselves in a way they usually weren't. Every stitch felt deliberate, every cut felt chosen. He was not just operating on a patient, he was operating on the man who made him possible, and then tried to make him impossible. He was operating on the source of every question his mother had ever deflected, and every Sunday night of counting quarters, and every bleach-stained hand that showed up at his science fair anyway. He placed the new valve, bovine tissue, strong, flexible. He sutured it into place with thread thinner than a human hair. 24 stitches. Each one had to be perfect. One weak stitch and the valve could leak. One misplaced stitch and the heart could tear. James placed all 24 without pausing. His index finger did not tap. His hands did not shake. Not once. The bypass machine was weaned off. Richard's heart began to beat on its own with the new valve. The monitor showed a steady rhythm, strong, even. The room exhaled. The lead nurse, a woman named Angela who had been in surgery for 30 years, looked at James over her mask and nodded once. That nod meant more than any award or any magazine article. It meant, that was clean work. James closed the chest. He stepped back from the table. He pulled off his gloves. He walked out of the operating room without saying a word. He went to the scrub room. He stood at the sink. He turned on the water and let it run over his hands. Hot first, then warm, then cool. He watched the water spiral down the drain. He stood there for 6 minutes. He knew because he counted the tiles on the wall and multiplied by the seconds between each breath. Then he called his mother. Gloria answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. First ring was too eager, she used to say. Third ring means you weren't paying attention. Second ring is just right. Baby? What's wrong? She could hear it in his voice. The thing that was wrong. the thing he hadn't said yet. "I just operated on Richard Whitfield," James said. He didn't use the word father. He said the name. "He was my patient today. Emergency case. Aortic valve replacement. I held his heart in my hands, Mom. I held it and I fixed it and I put it back." The line was silent. Not empty silent. Full silent. The kind of silence that contains an entire life inside it. 10 seconds passed. Gloria breathed in. Gloria breathed out. "Is he going to make it?" she asked. "Yes." "Good," Gloria said. Just that one word. Good. No bitterness, no sarcasm, no satisfaction. Just a word that meant, he is a human being, and you saved his life, and that matters. Then she said, "Are you okay?" "I don't know," James said. He said it honestly, the way he had always been honest with her, the way she had taught him to be honest by never pretending things were fine when they weren't. "Come home after your shift," Gloria said. "I'll make oxtail stew." James almost laughed. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Okay, Mom." "James?" "Yeah?" "I'm proud of you. Not because you saved him. I'm proud of you because you had every reason in the world not to. Every reason to walk away and let someone else handle it. And you didn't. You stayed. You did the work. That's who you are, baby. That's who I raised. And no amount of money in any bank account in this world can buy what you have inside you." But the biggest secret hadn't come out yet. Richard recovered. Slowly. Day by day, the color came back to his face. The gray turned to pale. The pale turned to something closer to alive. James checked on him every morning during rounds. He was professional, thorough. He read the charts. He checked the monitors. He asked about pain levels and breathing and appetite. He never said anything personal. He never let his hand linger. He never let his eyes stay too long. On the 5th day, Richard was sitting up in bed. His voice was stronger. His eyes were clearer. He looked at James with the kind of sharp attention that billion-dollar executives have, the kind that misses nothing. "Dr. Carter," Richard said, "you saved my life." "That's my job, Mr. Whitfield." "No," Richard said. "I've been in business for 50 years. I know the difference between someone doing a job and someone doing something extraordinary. What you did was extraordinary." He paused. He studied James's face. "You remind me of someone." James's finger tapped against his thigh. "I hear that sometimes," he said evenly. "Common face." "No," Richard said. "Not common. Something specific. Your eyes. The way you hold your hands. Something about your jaw." He trailed off. He shook his head. "Must be the medication." But it wasn't the medication, and Richard knew it. Something was pulling at the edges of his memory. Something old. Something buried. On the 7th day, Richard asked the head nurse for Dr. Carter's full name. Dolores hesitated. She looked at James's office door down the hall. Then she said, "Dr. James Carter." "Carter," Richard repeated. He said the name slowly, like he was testing it, like it was a key and he was trying different locks. "His mother. What's his mother's name?" Dolores said nothing. She didn't have to. Something in her silence told Richard everything. That evening, Richard called his personal assistant. He had a name traced. Gloria Carter, Dorchester. And in less than an hour, 34 years of silence unraveled like thread pulled from a sweater. The next morning, when James walked into room 412 for rounds, Richard was sitting up in bed. The gold watch was on the nightstand. His hands were folded in his lap, and his eyes were red. "You're Gloria Carter's son," Richard said. James stopped. His hand tightened on the chart. His finger tapped once against his thigh and then went still. He looked at Richard for a long time. The beeping monitor filled the silence between them. "Yes," James said. Richard's face crumbled. Not slowly, all at once. Like a wall that had been standing for decades and someone finally removed the one brick holding it up. His chin dropped. His eyes squeezed shut. His shoulders shook. And Richard Whitfield, the man who managed $11 billion, The man who owned yachts and jets and homes in 3 cities, the man who had never let anyone see him weak, began to cry. "I knew," Richard whispered. "The moment you walked in, something in me knew. I felt it. But I couldn't. I didn't want to." He couldn't finish. James stood at the foot of the bed. He did not move. He did not reach out. He held the chart against his chest like a shield and looked at this man who was falling apart in front of him. "You abandoned me," James said. His voice was calm, steady, the surgeon's voice. "You offered my mother money to make me disappear. You tried to buy your way out of being a father. $50,000. That's what my life was worth to you. $50,000 and a signature." "I was wrong," Richard said. The words came out broken. "I was scared, and I was selfish, and I was—" "You were a coward," James said, still calm, still steady. But something burned behind his eyes now, something that had waited 34 years for this moment. "You were a coward who chose comfort over responsibility. And my mother, who had nothing, who worked 3 jobs, who scrubbed floors on her hands and knees so I could go to school, she chose me every single day, without anyone asking her to, without anyone helping. She chose me." Richard pressed his hands over his face. His whole body shook. James set the chart down on the table. He pulled a chair to the side of the bed. He sat down. Not because he forgave Richard, not because the anger was gone, but because James was the man Gloria raised. And Gloria raised a man who sat down when other people fell apart. "You don't get to have me back," James said quietly. "You don't get to call yourself my father. That title belongs to my mother, because she was both. But I saved your life because that's who I am. Not because of who you are. Because of who she made me." Richard lowered his hands. His face was swollen and wet. He looked at James. At this man he had thrown away like a receipt. This man who had held his heart in his hands and put it back together. "She raised you," Richard said. "She raised you to be this. She raised me to be better than the choice you made," James said. "And she did it on a nurse's aide salary with sunflower curtains in the kitchen and a plastic model of a heart she bought at a garage sale for $2. Richard closed his eyes. A sound came out of him that was not a word. It was the sound of a man realizing, at 76 years old, that the greatest mistake of his life was not a bad investment or a failed merger. It was a check he slid across a table in a restaurant 34 years ago. James stood up. He straightened his coat. He picked up the chart. And he said the thing that Richard Whitfield would carry with him for whatever years he had left. "The measure of a man is not what he builds when he has everything. It is what he gives when he thinks he has nothing to gain." My mother knew that. She always did. Then James walked out of the room. He went to the scrub room. He washed his hands. He stood at the sink for a long time. His finger tapped against his thigh. Fast. Then slow. Then it stopped. He dried his hands. He went to his next patient. Richard was discharged from the hospital 10 days later. He went home to his house in Boston. The big house. The empty house. He sat in his study and looked at the walls and saw nothing. No photos, no memories, no sunflower curtains. Just expensive furniture and silence. He called Claire in San Francisco. She didn't answer. He called Thomas in New York. Thomas answered on the 4th ring and said, "How much do you need?" Richard said he didn't need money. He needed to talk. Thomas said he was busy and hung up. Richard sat in his chair for a long time after that. He looked at his gold watch on his wrist. He took it off. He set it on the desk. He stared at it. Then he put it in a drawer and closed it. 3 weeks later, Richard did something he had never done before in his life. He drove to Dorchester. Not in the chauffeured car he usually used. He drove himself. He hadn't driven himself anywhere in 15 years. He rented a simple sedan from a lot downtown. He drove slowly, carefully, his hands tight on the wheel, through streets that got narrower and houses that got smaller, and sidewalks that got more cracked the further he drove from downtown Boston. He found the small house with the creaky porch. He recognized it because of the sunflower curtains in the kitchen window. He could see them from the street. Yellow and warm, and still there after all these years. He parked his rented car on the street. He sat in it for a long time. 5 minutes. 10. His hands were still on the steering wheel. His new heart, the one James had built for him, was beating hard and fast. He could feel it in his chest, feel the new valve opening and closing the way it was supposed to. This heart that his son had repaired. His son who he had tried to erase with a check and a signature. Richard got out of the car. He walked up the porch steps. The second step creaked under his weight. He raised his hand to knock on the door and then stopped. His hand just hung there in the air. He could hear something inside. Music. An old gospel song playing softly from a radio. He could smell something too. Cocoa butter and something cooking. Something rich and warm. He knocked. Gloria opened the door. She was wearing a blue sweater with sleeves pushed up to her elbows and reading glasses pushed up on her head. Her hands were slightly damp, like she had just been at the sink. She looked at Richard Whitfield standing on her porch and she didn't gasp. She didn't step back. She didn't slam the door. She looked at him the way you look at the weather, without surprise, without anger, just acknowledgement that it was here, that it had finally come. She had known this day would arrive. She had known it for 34 years. She just didn't know which year it would choose. Gloria, Richard said. His voice was thin, stripped of all the boardroom authority, stripped of the commands and the certainty. What was left was just a man's voice, fragile, old. I came to say something I should have said 34 years ago. Gloria leaned against the doorframe. She crossed her arms. She didn't invite him in. She didn't send him away. She just stood there, in her own doorway, on her own porch, in front of her own sunflower curtains, and she waited. Because Gloria Carter had spent her whole life on other people's schedules. At the diner, at the cleaning service, at the Okafors. But this moment was hers, and she was going to take her time with it. I'm sorry, Richard said. Not for me. I don't deserve forgiveness, and I know that. I'm sorry for what I took from James. Not money, not support. Those things matter, but they're not the biggest thing I took. His voice cracked. I took a father from him. I took the one thing that no amount of money and no number of surgeries and no foundation donation can ever replace. I took a presence. I took a voice that was supposed to tell him he was doing good. I took a hand that was supposed to be on his shoulder when things got hard. And you? He stopped. He pressed his lips together. His chin was shaking. You gave him everything I should have given him and more. You gave it to him on a nurse's aide salary and 3 jobs and $30 on Saturdays. You are the bravest person I have ever met. And I have met a lot of people. Gloria looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light came through the porch and lit up the side of her face. She could see the scar on his chest through the open collar of his shirt. A vertical line, still pink, still healing. Her son's work. Her son's hands had opened this man's chest and held his heart and put it back together. She looked at that scar and she felt something she didn't expect to feel. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something quieter than both of those things. Something like peace. Richard, Gloria said, I forgave you a long time ago. Not for your sake, for mine. Carrying anger is heavy, and I had too many other things to carry. Groceries, laundry. A boy who needed me to be whole, not broken by something you did. So I put it down. Years ago. She paused. She uncrossed her arms. But forgiveness and trust are different things. You can have one without the other. And trust has to be earned. Over time. With actions, not speeches. Richard nodded. He understood. He knew the difference between a deal and a promise. He had broken enough of both to know. He turned to leave. He was on the second step, the one that creaked, when Gloria said, Richard. He turned back. He has your eyes, Gloria said. Her voice was softer now. Not warm, exactly, but not cold either. Something in between. something honest. But he has my heart, and that's the only inheritance that ever mattered. Richard drove home. He sat in his study. He opened the drawer. He looked at the gold watch. He left it there. He picked up his phone and made a call. Not to a business partner, not to a lawyer. He called the hospital and asked to make an anonymous donation to the Cardiothoracic Surgery Department's Resident Training Fund. $1 million. The administrator asked who to credit the donation to. Richard said, "Credit it to Gloria Carter." James found out about the donation 3 weeks later. He was in his office when the department chair told him, $1 million gift, credited to Gloria Carter. James sat at his desk for a long time after the chair left. He looked at the silver watch his mother had given him. He tapped his finger against his thigh. Fast, then slow, then it stopped. He drove to Dorchester that evening. He sat at the kitchen table with Gloria. The sunflower curtains glowed in the late light. Gloria set a bowl of oxtail stew in front of him. The steam rose from it like a small prayer. "He came here," Gloria said. "Your father, 3 weeks ago." James looked up from the bowl. "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry. And for the first time, I believed him." "Does that change anything?" Gloria reached across the table and put her hand over his. Her hand was rough, calloused. The hand of a woman who had spent her whole life working. But it was warm. It was always warm. "Baby," she said, "you held that man's heart in your hands and you healed it. You did that, not because he deserved it, because you are the kind of man who heals things instead of breaking them. And that is worth more than any building with his name on it." James turned his hand over and held his mother's. They sat like that for a while. The stew cooled. The sunflower curtains moved in a draft from the window. The house was small and warm and full of the smell of dinner and the sound of nothing at all, which is sometimes the most beautiful sound there is. James never called Richard his father. He never accepted dinner invitations or holiday visits or any of the careful, cautious gestures Richard began to make over the following months. But he didn't shut the door completely either. He left it open, just a crack, just enough for light to get through, because Gloria had taught him that too, that you can hold a boundary and hold compassion at the same time, that strength isn't about walls, it's about knowing which doors to open and how far. And on quiet evenings, when James sat at his mother's kitchen table under those sunflower curtains, eating oxtail stew and telling her about his day, he would sometimes touch the silver watch on his wrist and think about the plastic heart she bought him for $2 at a garage sale, the one he took apart and put back together 100 times. He thought about how strange life was, that a $2 toy had led him to holding a real heart in his hands, his father's heart. A heart that had failed the people it was supposed to love. And James had fixed it, not because of who his father was, but because of who his mother had made him. That's the end of today's story, but the lessons last forever. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and tell us in the comments, which character reminded you of someone in your own life? See you soon.